Hello everyone and welcome to our next video. In the previous video we changed a little bit how we handle errors in our application. So before we were directly sending this res.send status of 422 and this was being sent as the response for our request if there was any faulty code. However, I was not very satisfied with it because then this couples somehow the status, the HTTP response status logic with our route, and we would need to make decisions regarding which code exactly we want to send to the user, and this could grow quite big in terms of scope. And if there was another route which had a very similar logic, we would have to implement virtually the same code. So I think it would make sense for us to use what is called custom errors, right? To use a bunch of custom errors for us so that the routes, they don't need to know about how to handle an error. They just need to throw that error, and then the error handler itself is going to test and check that error for us. So I already wrote here this will change. We will use this to handle custom errors, and this is what we will start with now. So to begin with, it would be best if we had a base error, so an error template that we could start working with. So I will create a errors folder, and in here I can create a file, BaseCustomError.TypeScript, and within here I can define something that is going to be a class, right? And it's going to be, so export class BaseCustomError, let's call it like this, extends my native class error. And whenever I have a class that extends another class, I need to have a constructor. Right, in the constructor here, so the error, if we look at the error constructor, it accepts a message. So it would be best that we can also accept this message here. So this message can be always string, and this would be passed to our to the super type, so to the parent class that we are extending from, right? So this would be our message. And whenever we are extending a native class, then we need to do something that is a little bit let's say syntactic magic. I need to do this in order to be able to correctly use the methods of this class. So I need to call object.setPrototypeOf. Let's see what happens if I come here. So it sets the prototype of a specified object to the object prototype or null, and it returns the object, right? So proto is the value of the new prototype, and the new prototype is going to come from our custom class.prototype. And what I would like to do is I would like to implement I think one or two methods here. So I think it would be best if we had, let's say, the status code within our custom error. Let's say status code, and this is going to be a number, and it's complaining because I think I didn't mark it as private, or actually it's not initialized. It's not complaining because of that. If I came here and I said just status code, yeah, this dot status code is equal to 200, for example, then it would stop complaining. But in our case, we will do a slight modification here, because actually we never want to have this base custom error as being instantiated by itself. So I'm thinking about it. It would make sense to always have some specific error, right? Let's say invalid params or invalid parameters, or duplicated email or duplicated user or something like this. So an error that tells exactly what is happening, but that follows a certain structure. And how do we achieve that? Well, we achieve that by defining an abstract class. And the abstract class cannot be instantiated. We cannot create a class, a new BaseCustomError, but it gives us a template that we can extend from whenever we are creating our custom errors. So this will also be abstract, because I want to define the status code at my specific or at my individual errors. And here I want to define two methods. The first method is going to be get status code. Get status code, and this method is going to return a number, right? So that this will basically return this status code here. And I also want to have another method which is called serialize error, and this is going to return something. Let me mark this as any here, because we'll come back to this in a bit. So now I have a BaseCustomError. So why did I mark this as any? I just don't want to leave you in the dark. Whenever we serialize the error, even could be serialize error output. Whenever we serialize the error, we want to return a specific shape. We want to return one already predefined shape that we are going to use as a standard shape for all the errors that for all the custom errors that I implement. So I marked this as any here in TypeScript, because otherwise TypeScript doesn't like that there is no return type for the function. And because we don't know yet how the shape of the error is going to look like, then I will just mark this as okay, it could be anything, or even better, it's unknown, right? So I don't know yet how it's going to be, how my error is going to look like. But now I have a BaseCustomError that I can extend from. So with that in mind, let's us run our test watch, and let's see what's going to happen. I think everything should still pass because I didn't do anything in the code. But now I want to start using this BaseCustomError. So in my route, in my signup, I want to instead throw a new error. I would like to instead throw a new BaseCustomError, right? And as you can see, I immediately get an error because, as I mentioned before, this is an abstract class. I cannot instantiate it. I cannot create a new BaseCustomError. I can only create another custom error that is going to extend this BaseCustomError. And once it extends the BaseCustomError, I will be forced to implement the abstract methods and the abstract properties of this method. So in this case, this is if there are errors that come from this validation result, then we are going to have some error that is related to validation, right? So here we could say invalid input error, or bad request error, or we could say something invalid params, whatever we want to call it, right? So the idea here is that we can try to start thinking about how we can come up with a name for our custom error and then implement the functionality to give us the status code and the message that we want. So here I can say input, maybe input validation error, or input validation error. I think it's a good name, because then we know that this is going to be always the case when I have a validation result that has some errors. So I will just do a little bit of refactoring here because I'm inside the errors folder. So of course the input, yeah, but still this doesn't really follow a lot of, it's not the best naming. So ideally the naming would be meaningful without the word error, right? Like bad input or something. this would be a better name, or invalid input or something. Maybe I rename this to invalid input. Invalid input, and this would be the base custom error. So my invalid input, and then this a little bit of a somehow personal idea or personal approach, that I think that the name of the classes, they should reflect the inherent nature of that class. If I need to add an error keyword to the end to say that that is an error class, then the rest of the name of the class is not really relevant, right? It doesn't give us a lot of information. But if I immediately see invalid input, and then I know, okay, this immediately tells me that there is a problem with the input that was provided, right? If I simply say request validation, so say that I want to call my error request validation, this doesn't tell me much except if I add the error keyword at the end. So if I have request validation error, then I know that it's an error. But if I have just request validation, this doesn't tell me much. Or if I say input validation as it was before, it also doesn't tell me much, right? But invalid input, it tells me a lot of information. So that's just a small detail. It's something that I like to use meaningful names to the things that I want to implement. But if you prefer to go ahead with the error keyword at the end, then by all means. So export class invalid input extends base custom error. And now I have an invalid input that I could use within my application. And here, of course, if I have a class, I have a constructor which can receive a message, and we'll pass this message to our superclass. But it's also complaining that the non-abstract class does not implement the inherited abstract member, or the inherited, all the inherited abstract member doesn't seem to call this a method or an attribute. So by extending an abstract class and by declaring these methods, where's my base custom error, by declaring these methods as abstract, I force whatever new custom error I create, I force it to extend and to implement these methods. So if I have an invalid input, what I want to set as our status code is 422, right? That's the status code that we had before. And then here I have the get status code, which already is populated with a bit. And then I have the serialize error output. And then here I can just return this dot status code for my get status code, and the serialize error output I can define, I can return undefined for the moment. So I'm just interested in the status code. So now I have this class that I'm exporting here from my dot invalid input, and I would like to use it in my route, right? Because I cannot throw a new base custom error. So let's see whether things are going to work fine here. So let me save, and let's give a little bit of time. And of course it doesn't pass, it starts complaining, right? Cannot create an instance of an abstract class. So now if I substitute the base custom error by the invalid input, throw new invalid input, then this should stop complaining and the whole thing should start working again. Exactly, so my tests are passing. And then here we can send user input is not valid, or user input does not meet validation criteria. This for the moment is not going to change much for us. What we could do is we could have a fixed message for such an error. right? The message here, maybe I can have a constructor without anything and then say user input does not match validation criteria. This will not be sent to the user, right? This would be just for maybe logging purposes or something. And one thing that I forgot is to take this and add it here. And this should be the prototype of InvalidInput.prototype. Abstract class constructor can be made protected. Maybe I could mark this as protected, doesn't matter, right? I mean, the idea of a protected class is that, okay, of course, this now it's complaining because my constructor here is doesn't accept any argument. So in a bit I'll fix that. The idea of a protected class is that a protected method within a class or a protected attribute is that it is available for that class and for all the subclasses, so for all the classes that extend that parent class. So this can be made protected. Yeah, let's follow the advice, doesn't change much. And here I should not be passing this. So that's how we are going to work. Now it should be passing, everything should be passing just fine. Very nice. So the last step that I want to do is I want to go back to my middlewares, because now I have something that I can refer to, right? So here I have if error, and if there is an error, I always return a status of 422. So of course I will always return here because the error will be defined whenever I throw an error. This is an error handler middleware, right? So this test doesn't add a lot of value. So what I can test here is that if my error is an instance of my BaseCustomError, then I know that I am going to have a getStatusCode method and a serializeErrorOutput method. So the serializeErrorOutput method, we will probably deal with it in the next or 2 videos from now, but the getStatusCode, we can already work with it. And here I can say if error is an instance of my BaseCustomError, right? So if my error, so if my custom error is extending my BaseCustomError, then I'm going to enter inside this loop. And now, just for the sake of breaking everything, let me return a 400 if this is the case. And as you can see, everything breaks, right? Because now I'm within this if statement. Now, if I say if not error instance of BaseCustomError, then I'm going to return a 422. Let's say something like this, just for the sake of testing that this if statement works correctly. So now all the tests should pass exactly. So the idea is that I can enter this if statement by checking if my error is an instance of my BaseCustomError. And then, because and only because my error is an instance of BaseCustomError, then within here I can say error.getStatusCode. And here I can say I can send a generic response. Let's see how the tests behave, and everything is passed. Everything is working as expected, right? So all the tests are passing. We have done quite good work today because now we have some very scalable approach to our error handling. And I think error handling is perhaps one of the most underrated parts of API design or of design itself, because if we have a good error handling system, we can just give so much information about what is going wrong in our system and make the life of our users so much easier that I think it's definitely worth the effort. And especially because we will be developing an infrastructure that will have many customers, right? I mean, in the sense that whenever an error is thrown, for example, and we send a message within our microservices infrastructure, that message has to be standardized. It's much better if I have a message that I can already foresee how the shape of the error is going to look like than if I just have to guess or to handle a lot of cases. So this is why I have opted for this approach. Maybe at the beginning is a little bit of setup, but now we are good to go and continue extending. Maybe we implement this serialize error output in the next video, and then we can rest assured that we have a well-defined shape for our serialize error output abstract methods, right? In the next video, then I think we define this unknown, we think about it, how it should look like, and then we implement the respective logic within the invalid input error handler. Good. So just for fun, let's run the prettier fix here and let's see how many linting errors we have, because I'm pretty sure we have some. Exactly, yeah, we have some. BaseCustomError is defined but never used. Yeah, so that's in the sign up here. I think I imported and it should not be imported. Unexpected console statement, this we are ignoring, right? Expected this to be used by class method serialize error output. So the invalid input, it expected this. Is it like this? No, I don't think so. It's complaining that I'm not using this here. Maybe I could serialized error output. I mean, this really just for the sake of getting rid of the error, and maybe this preparing a little bit for the future, because we will inevitably use some this.errors or this.serialize, we'll see. Expected blank line between class members, so here I think is missing a blank line, and expected blank line between members, this is missing a blank line. As you can see, it's very strict, right? There's a lot of very strict checks, but I like this. I don't mind putting a bit of additional lines. I don't think that this slows down development. I don't have a problem with it. So now I think we are good to go. Let's add everything and let's commit. This is going to be our feed in off, and we have started implementation of custom error handling, custom errors, error classes, let's call it like this. Give it a couple of seconds, everything should pass, and now I can push this to the hippo. So I think that that's good enough. For now, we have done quite a lot of progress. In the next video, then we come back and we take care of this errors serialization. Is it how we pronounce it? And then we will be good to go to continue with the other functions that we want to implement. So we also want to maybe do a little bit of refactoring in the sign-up route so that we have more clear errors here that we are throwing. But then we can also go back to our actual functionality. So we are doing a little bit of refactoring here to make sure to make it easier for us to already work with more code. And for example, just to give an example, here this will become a custom error, right? So this here would be a, let's say, duplicated user error or something like this. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.